Welcome to the Happiness Matters podcast, where we'll explore happiness at work and show you how to coach yourself to be happier there and more successful too, no matter what.
Hello, here I am, Julia Seal, your coach and your host on our Happiness Matters coaching journey. Today we're tackling your questions around work-life balance, the great divide. We'll look at various aspects of the conversations around the distinction between work and life, as well as the idea of balance, and then we'll take out what's useful to us, to our own happiness and success. And as usual, I'll bring a coach's perspective to the whole thing, which you can take into your week to consider as you practice coaching yourself. Last week, I covered 3 big queries that I've received from you over these last few months of Series 1. We touched on establishing a basic meditation practice, what I like to call a sitting or breathing practice. I gave you some quick hacks on how to remind yourself to coach yourself throughout the day, and we spent a bit more time considering our shameful emotional immaturity. I'm sure you enjoyed the realization that we have pockets of emotional maturity in all our lives, no matter that we're successful professional women already. The question is, how ready are you to do something about this unskilled area of your life? Remember, if you do want to coach with me individually, if you've got a question about deepening the coaching we're doing here on the podcast, and you want to explore happiness and success in your midlife, please go to Coach with Julia at Happiness-Matters.coach, where you can book a free insight session to see how we might coach together. And of course, if you're up for the 8-week Coaching Relationships Research Project, submit your details at this link too, because I'm taking bookings right now. So what is the work-life divide? What is the debate all about? Pretty much what it's referring to is the distinction between working life and everything else. So professional life as separate from personal life and family life. We probably think about it most in terms of work-life balance, a term that originated in the UK in the 1970s. But for now, I just want to look at the divide between these dimensions of our life, and then let's have a look at the idea of balance between them. Do you remember in previous episodes, I introduced Welsh textile manufacturer Robert Owen? In the mid-1800s, right in the middle of the Industrial Revolution in the West, Owen led efforts to improve factory working conditions, including the development of the early trade union movement and supporting proper regulation of child labor. And he came up with this slogan for his own factory workers: 8 hours labor, 8 hours recreation, 8 hours rest. Years later, in 1904, an international call went out to all Social Democratic Party organizations and trade unions to demonstrate energetically on the 1st of May for the legal establishment of the 8-hour day, and ultimately to establish a culture of human and worker rights, ensuring these rights are enshrined in international and national law. This slogan, 8 hours labor, 8 hours recreation, 8 hours rest, has influenced how we have created our world, the way we think about work and leisure, the concept of the work-life divide, our views on work-life balance, 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours. Since then, legally established workers' rights have been instituted over the years across the world with varying degrees of success. The right to paid leave, maternity leave, paternity leave, gender equal pay, flexi-time. And the difference between countries seems to be the strength of their trade unions. Those countries with weaker trade unions have less policies, less legally established workers' rights, and these rights have created the boundaries where life is seen as distinct from work. Now, this distinction has protected personal life and family life from encroaching work demands. Remember, at the start of the first industrial revolution in Europe, people worked 16 hours a day, 6 days a week, and Sunday was off limits, so you could go to church. Now, the Eurozone has a better established legal work-life balance framework, especially for parental leave and the non-discrimination of part-time workers than the United States. The Happiness Gap study, published in 2016, describes the happiness parenting gap and shows us just how profoundly this work-life divide can impact us. The study, and others since then, describes how, regardless of what country you live in and what stage of life you might be at, having kids makes you significantly less happy compared to people who don't have kids. Now bear with me on this one. It goes on to indicate that North American parents are especially miserable on this front, posting the largest gap of 13% in a group of 22 developed countries. And the researchers looked at what impact policies such as paid sick leave and vacation leave and subsidized childcare can have on closing that gap. It was 100%. The researchers said, as social scientists, we rarely completely explain anything. But in this case, we completely explain the happiness parenting gap. In countries with the strongest family-friendly policy packages, the parental deficit in happiness was completely eliminated, accomplished by raising parents' happiness rather than lowering non-parents' happiness. Another example, France has established the El Khomri law, or the right to disconnect, to uphold the rights of employees to disconnect from work emails, mobile calls, and messages outside of office hours, as has Italy and the Philippines. And another, in the UK last year, the Labour Party proposed their Menopause at Work policy, where employers would be obliged to offer flexible hours to women experiencing menopause. So while we've got some established legal boundaries between work and life in some countries, so much of our 8 hours rest and 8 hours recreation run the risk of encroaching work demands. This year, with the COVID-19 pandemic running rife across the world, these boundaries are blurring still further as we work from home. A double-edged sword, as while we have our colleagues and our bosses now zooming into the privacy of our kitchens and our bedrooms, while our kids pull at our legs under the table, we're still able to be productive, keeping our organizations afloat and running through lockdown and protecting our earnings. While we can clearly see the benefits and pitfalls of creating a distinction between work and life, 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours, the separation of the two has led to something else we might want to consider, called the ideal worker archetype. A study from Stanford University describes the origins of the ideal worker. Created at first from productivity norms in factories, this was the white-collar worker of the early 1900s. By the 1950s, this was embodied by a white, middle-class family man with a stay-at-home spouse. The ideal worker is able to compartmentalize their day, setting aside uninterrupted work time and devoted single-mindedly to the good of the employer, not subject to personal distractions from family or other responsibilities. Nowadays, according to a current, as in published last month, Harvard Business Review article, it's an employee who is wholly devoted to their job and available 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, every year of their career. Now let's consider our own happiness and success, our own self-coaching. What if we stopped talking about the divide between work and life? What if we decided that for us this was no longer a useful narrative in our happiness and success? Consider spillage, where one bleeds into the other, and not just our iPhones or our recent work from home and lockdown. Stress is our best example of spillage, where we're unable to conform to the ideal worker archetype. How many of you have gone through a traumatic divorce or a death and had to go to work and show up motivated and enthusiastic? How many of you have a presentation that keeps you lying awake at night, or a crisis deadline that sees you snapping at your husband? Separating ourselves like the ideal worker is just not possible. What about Gallup's employee engagement survey that we spoke about in episode 1.39? Question 10. Do you have a best friend at work? Not a good friend, a best friend. And how essential this is to high engagement levels, highly productive work groups, and its positive effect on the company's bottom line. And according to Gallup, if this was improved to 60%, so if 6 out of 10 of us had a best friend at work, companies would have 36% fewer safety incidents, 7% more engaged customers, and 12% higher profits. We're whole beings, we're multi-dimensional. And as Jon Kabat-Zinn says, the creator of the Mind-Body Stress Reduction Program, wherever you go, there you are. So if we changed this narrative and decided instead to think, wherever I go, there I am, there is no divide between work and life. I cannot separate who I am at work from who I am at home. And so the questions for us all to consider in our self-coaching are, how would you lead differently? How would you run your own life differently? What would your self-care look like? How would you manage your screen time, your emails, calls from your boss, and requests from your team? And particularly for many of us, what conversations would you need to have with your workplace and your family? Where does the power lie when it comes to defining your own artisanal happiness, your happiness success formula? You could ask yourself the same questions when it comes to the next area we're going to consider. Not just the work-life divide, but work-life balance. So not only are these interlinked parts of our life supposed to be compartmentalized, but they should also be perfectly balanced. So work-life balance can be defined as a state of equilibrium in which demands of personal life, professional life, and family life are equal. But if we're seeing ourselves as whole beings and multi-dimensional, and we believe that wherever you go, there you are, is this even useful to us? Aren't we taking the idea of the ideal worker and imposing it on ourselves, creating our own new ideal where all dimensions of our lives should be in perfect balance? We've just upped the game for ourselves. Consider balance for a moment. Think of the scales that our mums used in the kitchen, the ones with weights that you used to carefully measure cake ingredients. Think back to the precision of measurement, teaspoon by teaspoon of flour or sugar, to get the scale to balance perfectly. Or consider the well-known Wheel of Life Balance Assessment tool that I introduced in episode 1.38. It's a visual representation of your view on your current life balance mapped on a circle, with each aspect of your life represented by a wheel spoke: work, physical, spiritual, family, social. I'll put some links in the show notes if you haven't used the wheel before. If all areas in your life are balanced, then the wheel of your life runs smoothly. But if one or more areas are out of balance, then your wheel gives for an uncomfortable, bumpy ride, perhaps even dangerous or completely non-functioning. Now think about it. What's a useful and much used coaching tool to view your life as a whole can also become your own instrument of emotional torture and suffering, torturing yourself with the thoughts that I should be able to create perfect balance between these dimensions all the time. When you think things like, I should be more balanced in my life. Now, what does this remind you of? Superwoman. Are you trying to be Superwoman? Are you defining your success as balanced, as successfully juggling everything? Is your happiness linked to how perfectly your scale balances and how well your wheel turns? Since most of us grew up in the 1980s, we'll know all about the ideal of Superwoman and what's now been identified as the Superwoman complex. Superwoman is the ideal woman, the wife, mother, and career woman who runs an efficient and organized home, is an attentive, loving mother, and a successful professional leader. How much of your messaging as a girl, as a young woman, was influenced by Shirley Conran's 1975 book, Superwoman, and how we should be doing housework? I most definitely was. The Superwoman book used to lie on my mum's table. Cosmopolitan magazine and Marvel Comics Wonder Woman, especially Linda Carter as Wonder Woman. I mean, come on. I can do it all, have it all, be it all, in perfect balance, all the time. At least nowadays, there are much, much better role models and better narratives to try on for young women and for us. Again, let's consider our own happiness and success, our own self-coaching, by expanding the earlier questions. How much emotional pain in your life are you creating as you pursue this elusive balance? Can you give up the I should conversation that you're having with yourself at this level of perfection? Truly, my friends, what if we stopped talking about balance between work and life, in the same way that we might give up talking about the divide between work and life? What if this was no longer a useful narrative in our happiness and success? Instead, what if there was no balance, but unbalance? What if you chose to be unbalanced across the dimensions of your wheel of life? So instead of aiming for perfect balance across the wheel all the time, if this is what you set yourself as the goal, what if you decided that unbalance was more suitable at different times of your life, different seasons of the year, that you chose to vary your focus to suit you perfectly, your own artisanal versions of division and balance? Let me give you an example. As a coach and as an individual, I don't aim for perfect balance anymore. Rather, my own happiness success formula is more dynamic and fluid. What it is, though, it's very intentional and purposeful. I think about my life as a whole carefully, and I tend to it carefully. Intentional, purposeful, crafted, and artisanal. So, I divide my year according to my coaching calendar. I coach you in blocks of 108 days, so you spend 108 days with me transforming an area of your midlife. We could be coaching on your relationships with others, or your relationship with yourself, or your relationship with your work. Now, within these 108-day blocks, I follow my own happiness success formula. Perhaps for 108 days, I'm adapting my eating for my dropping hormonal levels to shed some pesky menopause pounds. A few of those. Perhaps for 108 days, I'm strengthening my long-distance friendships. Or perhaps for 108 days, I'm practicing doing live video feeds for you. So my attention goes to this focus area, taking old automatic think, feel, act patterns out of my primitive brain and putting them into my prefrontal cortex, considering them, choosing what to keep and what to change, and then establishing new, more helpful thoughts, feelings, and actions until my brain establishes the new normal and puts them back into my automatic brain. So habits. It's all very intentional and purposeful evolution, just like it is to coach with me. The other areas of my life are not in such intense focus over these times. I let my automatic brain run these think, feel, act patterns as habits and rituals. I've created them previously, and I don't need to give them so much attention. So my current yoga practice or meditation, dog walking, and writing practices are easy and enjoyable. So if you were to choose your own version of division and balance in your life, what might it look like? Your own happiness success formula, your own artisanal happiness. If you threw out the old narratives of how life should fit into 888 boxes, how we should be at work, at home, at play, at rest, how balanced we should be, at the very least, you'd be unbalanced in midlife. How exciting! You'd be dynamic and stimulated. Crafting your life in midlife is such an adventure. Now is the time that we get to be idiosyncratic. We get to be eclectic, our very own versions of ourselves. How much fun! I hope you enjoyed today. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to end today with the hilarious poem from British poet Jenny Joseph called Warning. When I'm an old woman, I shall wear purple, with a red hat which doesn't go and doesn't suit me. And I shall spend my pension on brandy and summer gloves and satin sandals and say that we have no money for butter. I shall sit down on the pavement when I'm tired and gobble up samples in shops and press alarm bells and run my stick along the public railings and make up for the sobriety of my youth. I shall go out in my slippers in the rain and pick flowers in other people's gardens and learn to spit. Not during COVID. You might be arrested. You can wear terrible shirts and grow more fat and eat 3 pounds of sausages at a go, or only bread and pickle for a week, and hoard pens and pencils and beer mats and things in boxes. But now we must have clothes that keep us dry and pay our rent and not swear in the street and set a good example for the children. We must have friends to dinner and read the papers. But maybe I ought to practice a little now, so people who know me are not too shocked and surprised when suddenly I'm old and start to wear purple. So much fun. May you be happy, may you be free. There is no better time to do this coaching together. Bye for now from a chilly Cape morning. So cold there must be snow up in our high mountains.
Thanks for joining us on this Happiness Matters podcast. Do join us again here next week on Tuesday. You can subscribe to this series at Apple Podcasts on iTunes, or you can sign up for it on our website, Happiness-Matters.coach. That's Happiness-Matters.coach. COACH. Also, you can join our conversation on Facebook by following us there. Our Facebook page is also Happiness-Matters.coach.